In the summer of 1402, two of the most feared rulers in the world met on the plains near Ankara. One of them had built an empire through terror, speed, and perfect battlefield control. The other had forged the rising power of the Ottoman state through relentless war from the Balkans to Anatolia. By the end of the day, one ruler would still command victory. The other would be a prisoner. This was not just a battle of armies. It was a battle of heat, water, loyalty, fatigue, and timing. This was the Battle of Ankara. And this is how Amir Timur broke Sultan Bayezid. By 1402, Bayezid I had become one of the most dangerous rulers of his age. Known as the Thunderbolt, he was fast, aggressive, and relentless. He had pushed Ottoman power across Anatolia. He had beaten rivals. He had defeated crusading forces. And he ruled with the confidence of a man who believed momentum itself was a weapon. But to the east stood an even greater force, Timur. He was already a legend in his own lifetime. From Central Asia to Persia, from Mesopotamia to India, he had built an empire through maneuver, fear, discipline, and battlefield design. He did not simply defeat enemies. He reshaped the conditions in which they had to fight. Conflict between these two rulers became inevitable. Bayezid had absorbed powers in Anatolia that Timur viewed as part of his own political sphere. Timur advanced westward, challenging Ottoman authority. What had begun as imperial pressure became personal. Neither man intended to bend. Neither was willing to yield prestige. So the armies moved toward one another, and they carried more than weapons. They carried reputation, imperial ambition, old grudges, and the future of the region. Bayezid wanted action. That was natural. Speed had always been one of his greatest strengths. A rapid strike, a hard march, a decisive collision. This was the kind of war he understood best. But Timur refused to give him a clean battlefield. He maneuvered around the Ottoman approach. He took the initiative. He moved with purpose. And he forced Bayezid into a punishing campaign path. This mattered because the battlefield near Ankara was not forgiving. It was midsummer. The land was dry. The air was hot. Dust hung across the plain. And under those conditions, water became a weapon. Timur moved to control access to the most important water sources. That changed everything. An army can survive confusion. It can survive a long march. It can even survive fear. But thirst weakens everything. It weakens men. It weakens horses. It shortens patience. It destroys order before battle even begins. By the time Bayezid arrived, his army was already carrying strain. The Ottomans were tired, hot, dust-covered, pressured. And this meant Timur had already won the first phase of the campaign before the main clash had even begun. When the armies formed on the plains near Ankara, the scale of the confrontation was immense. Bayezid still commanded a formidable force. At the center stood his disciplined corps, including the Janissaries. He also had cavalry, Anatolian contingents, Tatar elements, Balkan troops, and Serbian heavy cavalry allies. This was not a weak army. It was dangerous, but it was also a composite army. That meant it relied not only on strength, but on cohesion. Timur's army worked differently. It was built around movement. Mounted archers, cavalry flexibility, pressure across space, and fast battlefield adaptation gave it a different kind of power. Timur wanted room. He wanted stretch. He wanted multiple points of pressure. He also brought elephants. They were not the core of his army, but they added intimidation, shock, and visual force. As both sides deployed, two different systems of war came into view. Bayezid needed decisive impact. Timur wanted controlled instability. Bayezid needed his line to hold together. Timur needed that line to begin loosening, sector by sector, until the whole structure could no longer resist. When the battle began, it was not decided in one instant. The Ottomans did not simply collapse. They fought hard. Bayezid remained dangerous. His core troops resisted. The Serbian cavalry in particular earned lasting respect for their resistance. But the deeper pressure on the Ottoman army was growing. Timur's cavalry maneuver spread across the field. Mounted archers applied harassment. Movement created stress far beyond the first point of contact. And all the weaknesses from before battle remained active. The heat had not disappeared. The thirst had not disappeared. The exhaustion had not disappeared. Under pressure, those burdens became heavier. Then came one of the most important turns of the battle. Some Anatolian contingents shifted away. Some Tatar elements went over to Timur. This was devastating. Not only because Bayezid lost men, but because he lost certainty. Defection spreads fear faster than casualties. Once troops begin to suspect that nearby units may not stay loyal, confidence weakens. And once confidence weakens, cohesion becomes far harder to preserve.
Take word to the
Now Bayezid was being attacked by more than blades and arrows. He was being attacked by maneuver, fatigue, heat, thirst, and internal fracture all at once. Even as the battle turned against him, Bayezid did not abandon the field. He kept fighting. That matters because Ankara was not merely a political collapse. It was still a brutal battle. Loyal men remained around him. The Janissaries still fought. The Serbian cavalry still resisted. The Ottoman center still had force. But courage alone could not restore control. This is one of the harshest truths of war. A commander can remain brave even after the battlefield stops obeying him. That is what began happening to Bayezid. He was no longer shaping events. He was surviving them. Timur's forces kept pressing from multiple directions. The Ottoman structure narrowed. The space for recovery disappeared. The field became smaller around the Sultan. At that point, the issue was no longer victory. It was escape. Bayezid attempted to break away, but Timur pursued relentlessly. And the ruler once called the Thunderbolt, the man who had terrified rivals across multiple regions, found himself trapped. Then came the moment that transformed defeat into disaster. Bayezid was captured alive. A ruler can lose a field and recover. But when a reigning sultan is taken prisoner, the defeat becomes larger than a battle. It becomes a shattered political order. The consequences of Ankara were enormous. Bayezid became the only Ottoman sultan captured by an enemy in open battle. That fact alone shows how extraordinary this defeat was. Timur had not simply won a campaign, he had broken the ruling center of the Ottoman state. After Ankara, the Ottoman world entered crisis. Bayezid's sons struggled against one another in the period known as the Ottoman Interregnum. The empire that had looked unstoppable was suddenly pulled into uncertainty, division, and civil conflict. And yet the battle also left behind a paradox. The Ottomans survived. In time, they recovered. Later generations would rebuild, expand, and create an even greater empire. But in 1402, that future was not guaranteed. Timur had revealed that Ottoman momentum could be broken. He had shown that speed and confidence were not enough against a commander who understood how to weaponize distance, fatigue, water, and loyalty. On the plains near Ankara, two conquerors met. One won one of the greatest victories of his life. The other suffered one of the most devastating defeats in Ottoman history. And the battle between them changed far more than one day of war. It broke a sultan, shattered an empire's momentum, and altered the history of the Near East.